welcome to the second half. My name is Jnanavaca, for those of you who don't know me, and welcome if you're watching at home. As Franny Manis was saying, as Dianata was saying, this is week 2 of this kind of 4-week series on the 4 myths of the spiritual life, which is a term that was coined not by myself but by Subhuti. It's not a traditional model, this. It's something that Subhuti came up with in 2003, I think. So I'm kind of riffing off it. Maitrabandhu and I are in the process of writing a book about it, and so for me it's quite handy to have a chance to give these talks because it's all going to find its way into it. So last week I was talking about the myths as an overview, just myth as an overview, how we need stories. In the words myth can, in our ordinary language, mean something that's just false and not true. But I'm trying to use it in the sense of a great story, a way of seeing our lives, a way of seeing the world in a larger context than we might normally do, of making sense of life, making sense of experience, in a universal kind of story, in a universal context. And do you remember I was talking about the film Sunshine? I forgot to say, some people have since told me that they've watched Sunshine on my recommendation. I forgot to say it's a horror film. It turns into a sort of slasher movie. And afterwards I was thinking, oh goodness, I've recommended something that some people are going to find horrific. Anyway, it might be too late. Sorry about that if it was too late. I seem to enjoy it myself. This week I want to talk about another film, which is also pretty scary. It's a scary film, but it's not a fictional story, it's a documentary. It's came out in 2018, so more of you might have seen it. It's called Free Solo. Who's watched Free Solo? Oh yeah, more of you have watched Free Solo. So Free Solo is a documentary film about Alex Honnold, this character in, well, he's not a character, he's a man. Alex Honnold, who is a climber, and he, in 2017, climbed El Capitan, which is this huge rock. He climbed one of the faces. It's like a sheer cliff face, which is around 3,000 feet high. So that's about 1,000 meters. He climbed it in just under 4 hours, going up this sheer cliff face. And the documentary is about him. Well, it sort of follows the climb as well as all the preparation and training and his life leading up to the climb. The amazing thing about the climb is that it's a free solo climb, and that means there's no equipment, no ropes, no anything. Yeah, he's just using his fingertips and his feet and maybe his knees. He's just using his body. Often it just feels like he's hanging on by his fingernails, and it's sheer. And often actually it's like he's tilted back. And I saw it on a relatively large screen. I foolishly was sitting at the front, and I didn't think I had vertigo until that film, and I was riveted and horrified and scared, and then even at one point a bit angry, I think, because I grew to like the man. I thought, you're a good man, and then what are you doing doing this, and what are you doing putting me through watching you doing this? Free Solo, incredible film. I'd watch it again and again. And Alex Honnold seems to be an incredible man. I mean, just to give you a sense of what that climb. I mean, the New York Times said that it was one of the greatest athletic feats of any kind ever. One of the greatest athletic feats of any kind ever. Somebody else said that it was like taking part in an Olympic sport, except in this case you either won gold or you died. Yeah? So you either won gold or you died. And for those almost 4 hours, 3 hours and 56 something minutes, not only was it an incredible athletic feat in terms of sheer physical strength and athleticism and coordination, I guess, it's an incredible mental feat of courage, but remarkable concentration. Because for a moment, if he loses concentration for a moment, I mean literally a moment, that would be it. That would be it. So imagine that focus. We've just been sitting in this class for 40 minutes trying to follow the breath. I'm sort of all over the place. Sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm listening to Pranayamanas, sometimes I'm in my head, sometimes in yesterday, whatever. The amount of concentration, I cannot imagine that level of concentration. I've been practicing the Dharma for almost 30 years. Sheer, incredible courage, concentration, focus. And not just in that 3 and a bit hour climb, 4 hour climb, but in the life leading up to that, his resolve, his one-pointed determination to achieve this level of fitness of body and mind was, I just found humbling, slightly sort of shaming and humbling. So I'll come back to Alex Honnold, the most remarkable man, I think. He, at one point in the film, says that nobody achieves great things by being happy and cozy. Nobody achieves great things by being happy and cozy. That was when he really got to me. I thought, oh dear. You're right, Alex. You're right. The Buddha could have said that. The Buddha would have probably used more traditional, formal language. But he could have said the same thing. And I just felt humiliated because I love happy and cozy. But that could be a strapline. Nobody achieved great things by being happy and cozy. That could be a strapline for this myth that I want to talk about, the myth of self-transcendence. Subhuti refers to it as the myth of self-development. I'm going to call it the myth of self-transcendence. I might use the other one, but I prefer, well, you'll sort of see why self-transcendence might be a better term for it than self-development. It's the myth of growth. It's the myth of effort. It's saying that we can do more than we think we're capable of. We can become bigger than we think we currently are, through striving, through effort, through discipline, through making progress. And this myth seems to be what the Buddha chiefly taught. You could say it's the foundational myth of Buddhism. In Triratna, it's the myth that Bhante Sangharakshita particularly emphasizes. The very last words of the Buddha, before he attained to parinirvana, before the death of his body, before he let go of this physical form, the very last words of the Buddha that we have, as it were, recorded. Well, does anybody know what they were? Oh, I'll just tell you. We haven't got time for guessing, have we? You can't sort of guess these things. He said, all conditioned things are impermanent. So that was a pith teaching about the nature of conditioned existence, the nature of our ordinary manifest reality. All conditioned things are impermanent. With mindfulness, strive on. With mindfulness, strive on. So the emphasis was, look, there is something to realize, There is some sort of goal, and you can achieve it through mindfulness and striving. Mindfulness and striving. There you go. Through mindfulness, strive on. That feels like, as I say, the foundation of the Buddha's teaching. Later Buddhism elaborates on that, maybe even develops it, maybe even contradicts it. And later on, I'm going to, next week and so on, I'll talk about other myths which seem to at least contradict it or take at least a different approach. But early Buddhism particularly talks about this is a path of growth, a path of development, a path that each of us can tread through striving, through effort. And certain traditions of Buddhism put more emphasis on this myth than others. So Zen Buddhism, for example, I was very drawn to Zen Buddhism when I was a young man. When I was a teenager, I read a few books on Zen, including Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which has nothing to do with Zen. And I thought Zen Buddhism, that's where it's at. I think I fancied myself as a Zen master. I've sort of read about Zen masters going around with sticks in the meditation hall, hitting people on the back of the shoulders and the neck, and saying enigmatic things and being fierce, and everybody trembling and being overawed at their profundity. I thought, one day I'm going to be a Zen master and have a stick. And when I was in my late teens at university, I joined a Zen Buddhist group. It was the only Buddhist group that I ever came across. A Buddhist teacher called Dr. Clive Sherlock, who I regard as my first Dharma teacher. I recently met him. Well, in the pandemic we had a meeting on Zoom, and he's an academic, he's a psychiatrist and still teaching. And anyway, I joined his sort of group, and the emphasis was definitely on discipline and mindfulness. Routine, make your life disciplined. Like, get up at the same time every day, go to bed at the same time every day. If you're washing up, just wash up. If you're reading a book, just read. If you're eating a meal, just eat. Do not try and multitask. Do not do two different things at the same time. Well, that's multitasking, isn't it? Just have a disciplined, routine, mindful life, and strive. And what's more, when you want to, well, you'll react and rebel. Part of the ego will rebel, and that's good, because wear that egotism down. Yeah, don't give in to it. Become a Zen warrior. He never said that, but that's what I had. Zen warrior, Jnanavaca. I wasn't Jnanavaca then. Anyway, I discovered I wasn't cut out for it. I don't have a warrior in me, and I don't think I have the discipline. I don't have the discipline now. I certainly didn't have it then. I can remember sort of, well, you had to get up at the same time. You could set your own time. So I said, oh, well, let's set 7 a.m., 7 a.m. But you weren't allowed to vary it by 30 seconds even. Yeah? 7 a.m. And then set your own bedtime. So mine was 11 a.m. p.m. It could have been. And I can remember being down the pub with my housemates. I was living in a shared house with 5 others, and we were all down the pub drinking away. And Tim says to me, "Shouldn't you be in bed?" And like in 5 minutes, shouldn't you be in bed? And I thought, gee, I should. And I had a pint. Most of a pint, still waiting to be drunk. And I managed to down this pint, the fastest I've ever downed a pint. Hopped onto my bike, cycled home, and jumped into bed just after 11, and thought, that's not bad. Anyway, it dawned on me eventually that that wasn't what Zen Buddhism was trying to exactly get at. It's not what the Buddha meant by with mindfulness strive on. The trouble was I didn't know any different. I kind of thought, oh well, if I can't do that, then I can't do Buddhism, and I better just forget about all this Buddhist nonsense. Even if it's true, it's not for me. I'm just not cut out to do it. And I gave up. And I gave up on Buddhism for close on 10 years. And in those days, this was in the 80s and early 90s, you didn't have the internet, so it wasn't like you stumbled upon, you couldn't just Google Buddhism. You couldn't just find a Buddhist teacher. It felt much more hit and miss than that. So I sort of gave up on it for almost 10 years. But yes, discipline, striving, growth, it is nevertheless, for all my sort of mocking of it, it's actually essential. You can't, I don't think, you can't grow towards enlightenment unless you've got some degree of determination and striving and a sense of a goal. For example, well, the Buddha taught, the metaphor that he used for the Dharma was, the chief metaphor was of a path. That to practice the Dharma is to be on a path. That metaphor, and it is a metaphor, means that you progress. You walk along this path. You're on a journey. You could say you're on a quest. There will be challenges, obstacles on that quest, but you're on it. You're on this journey, on a path. That feels to me like a universal metaphor that most traditions in our human history have used in some form or other. The myth of the journey, the myth of the path, the myth of the quest, the myth of striving, the myth of overcoming obstacles, the myth of not giving up, of keeping on going in the face of... And then through that you learn, you come out the other side and you are a changed person. That's the myth, isn't it? And it seems to have truth to it. So that was the primary metaphor, is the primary metaphor. And the model of the path, or the metaphor of the path, is, well, what are the advantages of having that model? I want to explore in this talk, I'm going to get us to together explore the front and back of this myth. By front, I mean the positives of this myth, the advantages of this myth, the reason this myth is so valuable. By the back, I mean the disadvantages, particularly if you take this myth up in the wrong way, if you take it up literally. What are the pitfalls of this myth? There are pitfalls. So we're going to come on to the back of this myth, but I want to start with the front of this myth. What are the good things about this myth? Why do we need it? So what are the advantages of thinking in terms of a path of growth, a path of development? Can anybody think of anything that is really good about having that? Yeah.
It's hopeful.
Yes, yes.
It suggests sort of, yeah, you're here now.
Yes.
You're going to be going over there.
Yes.
That kind of gives you like hope and sort of motivation in the present.
Yes, exactly. So did everybody hear that? Tell me your name again.
Izzy.
Izzy, yeah. Izzy said it's a hopeful metaphor. It says that, look, you are here now with all of our imperfections, all the stuff in our life that isn't necessarily how we'd like it, all the complications in our psyche, internal world, but also in our life generally. This is where I am now. It starts from wherever I am now, and it's hopeful because it says, look, you can move, you and your life can develop into something more positive, something more creative, something more fulfilling, something more like enlightenment. You can move in this direction from wherever you are now. So it's positive, it's hopeful, it's pragmatic. Izzy didn't say that, but by pragmatic I mean that the path comes right down to you now. There's no it reaches down to you and says, yes, there you are, an unenlightened mess of a being, and that's okay, because you're on a path, and wherever you are, there's more, and you can grow, you can move. That's really good. So it's a pragmatic, positive, hopeful, practical myth. Yeah, really, really good. Thanks, Lizzie. Any other advantages, positives you can think of? Yes.
It's quite a forgiving metaphor in that
Yes.
it doesn't expect you to achieve all the change you want to achieve in one go. It expects you to take one step at a time.
Yes, I think that's really good. Tell me your name.
I sound a little bit. It's Ben.
Ben. So Ben's saying, thanks Ben, that it's a myth that you can take one step at a time. You don't have to be at perfection all in one go. It's forgiving in that sense of our foibles and failings, and I think that's really, really important. I don't know. I mean, many of you, probably most of you, are younger than me, and I do think that, well, I grew up in an age before social media and Instagram and so forth, and I still don't really participate in social media, but I meet a lot of young people for whom their expectations of who they should be and what their life should be like feel, to me, impossibly high. I didn't have that in my generation. Not that sort of pressure from friends and peers and the world around me. But these days, everybody seems to have to be perfect, successful, beautiful, rich, famous, having a wonderful time all the time, with the perfect person that's your partner, or people that you're partners, or whatever it is, but the perfect life in every sort of way. Otherwise, you failed. And that's a pretty destructive mindset to get into. Whereas this myth, as Ben is saying, is more forgiving than that. It's saying, no, you can grow one step at a time. And what's more, it gives you, you didn't say this, Ben, but it gives you tools, practices, whereby you can grow. It sort of helps you along the way. So that's really good. Any others? Oh, I've got loads now. I saw you first. I don't know your name. Tell me your name.
Dylan.
Dylan. Hi, Dylan.
It allows you to draw parallels with others at various stages of that journey. It kind of universalizes your experience and lets you both empathize and be inspired by others.
That's so important. So Dylan is saying that it allows you to, as it were, draw parallels, positive comparisons with others on the path, and you can be then inspired by people further along the path, but also universalizes, I think you were saying, that we're all potentially capable of more, of growing. Now, I think that's so key. When the Buddha is said to have gained enlightenment and surveyed with his newly enlightened experience, his newly enlightened mind, he surveyed the human situation, the world around him. One of the images that we get in the suttas that he's said to have seen is an image of humanity as lotuses in a bed of lotuses, in a pond, in this vast pond. Humanity as a bed of lotuses, each lotus being in different stages of growth and unfoldment, and different colours as well. Well, he mentions 3 colours of red, blue and white, and I don't know what significance that has, but I like the fact that there were different coloured lotuses in different stages of unfoldment. Now the point there is that you've got 2 things. Several things. On the one hand, we're different. There's different colours, for example. There's a uniqueness. On the other hand, we're all lotuses, so there's this sameness. particularly there's a sameness of potential, which is unfolding into this beautiful flower. So equal potential, but then different stages of development, different stages of growth. So some lotuses were still in the mud. Lotuses grow out of the mud. Some lotuses were buds, but they were still underwater. Some lotuses had just broken through the surface of the water. Some had broken right through and had started to open, and some were fully open, open to the sun. So you had these different stages of involvement, but you see that because all beings were potentially lotuses in full bloom, i.e. potentially Buddhas, potentially enlightened beings, there's no sort of harsh sense of judgment. There's no sort of condemnation. Oh, you're just a bud and I'm a fully enlightened bloom or whatever. There's no sort of... Do you see what I mean? It's more like saying, no, we are all, in a way, the same. And yet, it's not some sort of postmodern relativism either. It is acknowledging that some people are further along on the path than others. Does that make sense? I think that's a lovely image that avoids pitfalls when we talk about hierarchy or comparison or something. We can sometimes become intolerant or lose our sense of self-worth. Or this image of lotuses, all of us being lotuses, I think is a really wonderful image that I try and bear in mind. So again, there's something very positive. You can, well, the other thing that I think I'm going to draw out of what you said, Dylan, and out of this image, is that you, through this myth, you can have a sense that there's other people on the path with you. It can be a collective practice, and that some of those people along in a community like this one, in a sangha like this one, some of them might be newer to the path than you are, and some might be more experienced and further along. And you can, as it were, reach out and help people along the way. You can also draw inspiration from people along the way. Yeah. So you're not in this thing together. Alex Honnold was on his own. He chose to climb on his own, free solo. But actually, when you see the film, he's not. He's got lots of friends supporting him, helping him, encouraging him. He's also, this was in 2017 that he did this incredible feat. He had a girlfriend who's now, he's married to, I believe, Sani, I think her name is, and she supports him. Incredibly, actually, she supports him. In a way, she hates what he's doing. You can imagine, actually, when he's climbing El Capitan in this mammoth feat, she has to drive off somewhere. She can't bear to be there. Even the cameraman, because in this film, they're filming this thing live. It's not a reconstruction. They're actually got a film crew hanging off ropes at various points, and the cameraman cannot bear to look. Yeah, so Sani definitely couldn't bear to look. Like, what if he doesn't come back? What if he doesn't make it? At the same time, she is willing to support him in this great adventure that he has chosen to live his life by. For him, climbing and doing this sort of free solo climb is the most fulfilling, freeing thing in the world, and she supports him. So even Alex Honnold has a community around him that support him. So that's part of this myth, the myth of being on a path with others. Anybody else? Oh. Yeah, go on. Hi.
Recognises the truth of impermanence.
Say more about that.
Oh, God.
Why does it recognise the truth of impermanence?
Because life is impermanent.
Yes. Go on. I thought you were going to say something else.
What do you think I was going to say?
Normally when we think of impermanence, this is what you meant, I know you did. Normally when we think of impermanence, we just think of things ending and impermanence being as some sort of bad, horrible thing. But actually, impermanence is also a teaching which enables, the fact that things are impermanent means that things can change, and therefore it enables growth, it enables life. If things were static, if this universe was static, there would be no life, we would not be here. It's only because of this teaching of impermanence, which you could say is the teaching of change. Buddhism says there is only change, there is no stasis, there are no things, there is only change. Because of that, we can grow. Because of that, growth is possible. Does that make sense?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
You were going to say that. So yes, it recognises and uses, pragmatically uses this teaching that all things are impermanent. The way it uses it is, well, first of all, it aligns ourselves with natural laws. One of the laws that it aligns, the path aligns ourselves with, is the law of karma. So what this path says is that, look, if you act in ever more skillful ways, you will grow, because the law of karma says that you will grow. The law of karma also says if I act in ever more unskillful ways, from self-centeredness and hatred and ignorance, then I will shrink. My life will shrink. I will become more rigid, I will become smaller, I will become more petty, I will become more full of hatred and selfishness and so forth, and my life will shrink. And that alone is a sort of suffering, is a sort of dukkha. But I will probably also be a negative influence on others around me. The opposite is also true, both of the law of karma. So you act from mindfulness and metta and generosity and a sense of love and honesty and so forth, and we will grow. So it uses the law of karma. The path that the Buddha used the metaphor of the path, and then he gave quite a number of formulations of the path, different ways of thinking about the path, models of the path, one of which is the threefold path. Are you familiar with the threefold path? Who's familiar with the threefold path? Yeah. So who wants to say what the three folds of the threefold path are? Do you want to say?
Yeah. So the Pali terms are sila, samadhi, prajna, so kind of ethics and behavior, our actions in the world, meditation, kind of stilling our minds, concentration, and wisdom.
Yeah, thank you very much. So sila, samadhi, prajna, ethics, meditation, and wisdom. This is perhaps the most simple, the most fundamental model of the path. Again, when the Buddha was in the last months of his life, in the last year of his life, he knew that he was dying, his body was going to die. Anyway, he decided that before he attained to parinirvana, he was going to go round on foot as many of his followers and communities of disciples as he could. And again, wherever he went, he taught the threefold path. He said, great is the fruit of meditation when it is surrounded by the practice of ethics. Great is the fruit of wisdom when it is surrounded by the practice of meditation, i.e. ethics, meditation and wisdom. There's a sequence here. You work on your behaviour first. Well, we work on our behaviour and our speech. Then we refine our minds still further through meditation. Yeah? And then on a basis of a refined, absorbed, flexible, malleable, uplifted, positive, clear, bright mind that will result from ethics and meditation, will result from this law of karma. On the basis of that, you contemplate, you consider wisdom teachings. In particular, you contemplate the fact that to think of me as a fixed and separate entity is a wrong view. That's a delusion. And to think of the world as fixed and separate to me out there is also a delusion. That common sense perception is a delusion. Not that it isn't happening, but our interpretation of it is wrong. And you contemplate that in meditation, and then if you do that, and you reflect on it outside of meditation as well, you study it, you reflect on it, you drop it into a pure, still, clear mind, then sometimes what happens is a flash of realization occurs, a new vista opens up, a new dimension of consciousness opens up, a dimension of consciousness that we're all potentially able to access, but normally we don't even know exists. It's a new type of consciousness. It's not just more of the same. It's not just like me on a good day. It's not just like, oh, when I'm on a good day I might feel friendly to everybody and the world looks beautiful and bright. It's not just that. It's a new type of consciousness that is, as it were, different to my normal consciousness, as human consciousness might be to the consciousness of simple animals. Yeah, it's that sort of step change. That can only open up through wisdom practice. But there's a sequence. You can't just jump to wisdom practice if we're not trying to work on our behaviour and we're not trying to clarify the mind. I mean, that's not completely true. Some people do have wisdom experiences sort of out of the blue. I know of somebody who had one on a bus and they'd never been practicing, and suddenly they had one on the bus, on the double-decker bus, on the top deck of the bus. I don't know where they were going. They had this. Later on, this person came on one of our retreats and said that the realization that she had had, when she heard the Heart Sutra, which is a wisdom text, she knew that it was that was the realization. Yeah. So that can happen out of the blue. The only thing is that if our lives, our behavior and our minds aren't prepared for that wisdom teaching, then it will be like it drains away like through a sieve. It won't have a lasting transformative influence. Does that make sense? And actually it could even destabilize us if we're not sufficiently ready. So the path that's recommended is one of regular steps. So what we've said is that it's a positive myth, it's an accessible myth, it's a myth that is pragmatic, it's a myth that... one more thing perhaps is that what the Buddha says is that, look, you can make progress not by, as it were, forcefully striving. There is some effort required, but it's not like you can force a plant to grow. Do you know what I mean? You can't yank up a lotus and prise its petals open. And you can't do that. What you have to do with a plant is give it the right conditions for growth to happen. And in a sense, this path that we walk on, yes, there will be striving, but really the importance is also on having the right sorts of conditions. So what sort of conditions do you think would help us on the path to enlightenment? What sort of external conditions do you think will help? James?
Well, you mentioned the path of regular steps already.
Yeah.
So that would be helpful.
So yeah, ethics, meditation, wisdom. Treading that path in a systematic way. Meditation, for example, having a regular meditation practice is one of the conditions.
Staying in communication with others as well, who are doing the same thing.
Yes, staying in communication with others who are doing the same thing. I think it's very, very difficult to achieve anything great in life. I mean, Alex Honnold might be an exception. It's very, very difficult to achieve anything great in life if you're not also in communication with others who are supporting you. Who are also trying to practice. One of the things that we're trying to do in Triratna, in the LBC, is to create a community. We've got so much emphasis on community, on Sangha, in order that we can support each other. Another condition?
Having a spiritual guide.
Having a spiritual guide, yes. So having guides, teachers that you can grow from and learn from. In Triratna, we don't have a very, very hierarchical kind of Sangha. What we have is a network of friendship. And then some people who are more experienced than others might be able to guide, but it's not like you have just like one teacher with a capital T. It's more like a network of friendship, of people sharing their practice. So although, for example, I'm sitting up here, as it were, in the role of a teacher, in Triratna, how I think of myself is more as a practitioner trying to share my practice. I'm not realised, I'm not that fully opened lotus yet. I'm on the path with all of you. And with some of you, I may have some guidance that I can offer. Does that make sense? It's a practitioner sharing practice in the spirit of friendship. So that's another condition. Any more? Yeah, Pete.
Commitment.
Commitment, yeah, commitment. I think without commitment, I don't know, commitment can be a dirty word, can't it? Like duty or something. Without commitment, we won't really make progress towards enlightenment, but actually towards anything. One of the, I think, curses of our modern age is the fact that we have so much choice, so many of us have so much choice about what to do, including choice in terms of our spiritual lives. Yeah, I mean, when I came along, as I said, it was hard to find a Buddhist group. Now, Buddhist groups are a dozen a penny. I mean, you just have to Google. I mean, on YouTube, you've got, I don't know how many teachers willing to teach you all sorts of Buddhist teachings, yeah? So it's very easy to flit from one to another and not actually commit to anything. Yeah? And in a sense, a period of exploration is no bad thing, but unless you come to actually commit at some point, you can't grow, you can't develop. Yeah? Commitment. Okay, I'm going to move on to some of the disadvantages of this myth, because I think this, like any myth, it's got its drawbacks, particularly when taken literally. You have to remember that these myths are also metaphors. It's not that the path is a real thing with enlightenment at the end of it and us here and a real path. Yeah? What Sangharakshita, for example, says is that it's not like you, as you are now, walk along some path and end up enlightened. It would be more accurate to say that you are the path. You are the path. So as you practice, you unfold and grow. You change. So the person that reaches enlightenment won't be the person that started out on the path. Do you see what I mean? It's not, you are the path. You can't tread this path without changing. So that would be one example of where it could be taken the wrong way. The model of the path could be taken literally and in the wrong way. So sometimes, for example, people want to get enlightened, but they don't want to change. Yeah? They want to be enlightened just as I am now, with me right now, with all the comfort and coziness and happiness of my life. Comfort and coziness, let's just stick with that. I'm not going to give all that up, my lions, my cakes and whatever. I had a custard donut today in 45, and I had the last one. In fact, Akasha Jyoti, who works there sometimes, said, sort of put one aside for me. And that's fine, isn't it? But it's not gonna it's not gonna contribute to this particular path. Yeah. But sometimes what we want to say is, no, I just want to remain as I am now. Don't tell me that I need to change. Don't tell me that I need to grow up. Don't tell me that I need to change my habits or take more responsibility or become more generous or less graspy or more truthful. Don't you know? But I do want to get enlightened. Yeah? So that can happen. Any other thoughts about the disadvantages if we take the myth the wrong way round? Yes, go on.
Sort of the opposite to what you're saying, but sort of saying it's if you sort of think that there's something wrong with you and you need to become better.
Yeah.
It's sort of like thinking I'm not okay as I am. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Did everybody tell me your name?
Cheryl.
Cheryl. Did everybody hear Cheryl? I'll repeat it because of the mic and those at home. Cheryl's saying one possible kind of pitfall is if you approach this myth because you have a sense of not being okay and therefore you want to somehow change who you are, but not from a place of being satisfied with who you are, but being somehow not okay. And I think that what it's interesting actually, I want to go back to Alex Honnold. He in the film is asked about what motivates him to do these incredible but horrifyingly risky things like free solo climbs. What is it that motivates him? Why is he doing that? And he says, oh, that's because there's a bottomless pit of self-loathing. A bottomless pit of self-loathing, which is quite hard to hear, isn't it? I think he lost his father when he was quite young, and his mother seems to have been, well, not the most affectionate of people, so he never sort of got hugged and so forth. And she had mottos like good is not good enough, and so forth. And you can imagine this boy having this sense that he just isn't good enough, and out of that feeling unworthy, self-loathing, forcing himself to do these most incredible things. Yep. And it's easy to come to Buddhism with the sense that we're not good enough, and therefore we want to become enlightened. Now, actually, however you come to Buddhism, I think is fine. But if you come with this sense of deep unworthiness, of self-loathing or not being good enough, that is probably the first thing that you need to address on this path. Because if we cover that over, pretend that we're not full of self-loathing, or pretend that we haven't got this sense of lack or unworthiness, but we're going to really strive and become better, it won't work. It'll run out on you, this path. Bhante Sangharakshita says, look, the first stage on the path is to become a happy, healthy human being. One who is relatively okay with being who they are. Even though we're not perfect, one of the first things you have to do is acknowledge who you are and accept that. Not in that sort of, I'm therefore not going to try and grow, not in that passive way, but accept it in the sense of, okay, that's who I am. That's who I am. That's what I've got to work with. That's okay. I've got potential to be more, and it's okay to be me. And I don't have to be perfect. Does that make sense? It's, one of my teachers, Ratnagosha, when I first came along, he said that you may have heard me say this before, but the most common, he says he encountered a lot of people who, the two most common things that were obstacles to them making progress in the spiritual life, in the Dharma life, were, one, thinking that they had to be perfect, and two, thinking other people had to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect in order to be on this path. You are fine to be on this path. What this path is saying, however, is that you can be more than you are. Yeah, so that's really important, really, really important. Self-metta is very, very important. Yeah? And that can be one of the first things that we have to learn. And it's particularly important in our current age, where a lot of people just have this deep-seated sense of lack of self-worth. What then can happen, by the way, is that they practice Buddhism in order to compensate for that lack of self-worth, and it becomes all about succeeding. So in our community, for example, there are stages, there are markers along this path. So if you want to, you can make a commitment, as some of you have done. It's not so much a commitment, it's a declaration that you're a Buddhist. You can become a mitra, which means friend. And you can say, yes, I want to practice within this community. And then you get extra support, like study groups and so forth. If you then want to go further, you can ask to join the order. You can say, I want to be ordained. And then you get extra support and training still. That's another marker on the path, asking for ordination. Anybody can ask for ordination if they've been around 6 months or so and knows what they're asking for. Sometimes we might say, wait a bit longer till you know what you're asking for. And then eventually you can be recognised as being ready for ordination. And that's then a huge marker on the path. So in our community, and then you get ordained, and then, yeah, there are further markers. It's too tedious to go on to explain those. But what you've got is a community that's got structures and institutions within it to help you have intermediate goals this side of enlightenment. Do you see what I mean? And make progress on the path. That's really, really helpful. But I've seen people for whom, say, ordination becomes all about a badge of success. Yeah? Do you get that? Like, they are going to get to wear one of these things and be given a Sanskrit or Pali name. And then, well, that's, I don't know then what, actually, because you don't get anything else. You do get this piece of cloth, and you get a name. Actually, you get initiated into meditation practices that are wisdom practices. So that's very, very precious indeed. That's kind of about it. Those practices only work if you commit to them and keep them up. The ordination won't do it for you. And then you're more on your own. It's like, well, do you want to move towards enlightenment for the sake of all beings, which is what you commit to at the state of ordination, or not? So lack of self-worth can then lead to a compensatory, success-oriented, graspy kind of thing, and that will run out on us, yeah, at some point. You can then lose motivation. I've seen people get ordained and then lose all motivation because they got what they wanted, and now what? Yeah. We try not to make that let that happen, because we test people along the way about their motivations, but unfortunately it can still happen. Our motivations can be hidden from ourselves. We don't always know ourselves and our own motivations. Another related drawback can be a sort of naive goal orientation. What I mean by naive goal orientation is that we don't realise how complex we are and how much of us needs transformation and how difficult transformation really is. So we think, well, I thought this. I went on a 10-day retreat, my first retreat. I had a bit of a meditation experience and thought, okay, so a few more retreats like this and I'll be there. And it was completely naive. I had no idea how deep my tendencies to craving and comfort and coziness go. No idea how attached I am to pleasure and to having a nice time. Stop smiling, Pranimanas. He's sort of smiling knowingly. But it's true. And so that naive goal orientation, what it can lead to, it didn't in my case. I kind of have shed some of my naivety. Maybe I'm still naive, but I've shed some of it. But what for some people it can lead to is disappointment and then a sense that, oh, I failed. It was much harder than I thought. I didn't reach enlightenment in 5 years or whatever. Tell you what, it's just too much for me, I've failed. Actually, I did have that when I was younger, when I was 19. So do you see that? That can all be also. Another thing about the Sangha, I said how wonderful it was to have a community of people on the path. Well, I tell you what, it's also a challenge to have a community. Because why is that? Why is it a challenge to have a community?
Other people are annoying.
Other people are annoying, that's right, other people are annoying. They are not perfect. They're not perfect. And what's more, they're imperfect in different ways to you. Yeah? So things that you're good at, they may not be so good at, and vice versa. And they will press your buttons. They will press your buttons. And then the challenge is, can you forgive? Can you become bigger? Can you not blame? Can you not... your teachers won't be perfect. So you may have looked up to some people in the community and thought, I want to learn from that person. And then you do learn from that person, and then you find that, oh, they're not perfect. Maybe they let you down. Maybe they say the wrong thing. Maybe they give you some teaching that doesn't work for you. Yeah? And then you have to forgive and recognise that they're a human being like you are. And yes, they may have some more experience, but they're not fully enlightened. All sorts of problems happen when you engage in a community. If you engage fully, it's possible to stay aloof and rather distant, but then you won't gain. The growth happens by close engagement, and the irritations that then can arise, the disappointments that can arise, the frustrations that can arise, and then working on becoming a bigger person. That's why we have, like, I live in a community, we're in a residential community with, at the moment, 9 other men. And actually it's a lovely, well, I've lived there for 27 years. I love it. It's a wonderful kind of way to live. But you cannot always get your way. In fact, mostly you have to, with 9 others, do you see what I mean? They outnumber you. So you cannot get your way. And that's a good thing, because if I could always get my way, I would get my way. And then I wouldn't have to work on myself. Anyway, look, I'm going to start wrapping up. But we've got this, so I want to just sort of summarise. We've got these pros and cons of this model. It's, on the one hand, I think it's an essential model, particularly when you're new to the Buddhist life. If you give up on this model of a path of growth, of transcendence, I can pretty much guarantee that you will not make much progress. You might, you might be exceptional, and there are other myths, so one never wants to say never. But for most people, this is the fundamental model, the myth of transcendence, of growth. I.e., you have to make an effort, and probably you need friends and guides around you to help you make that effort and help you avoid some of the pitfalls. Yeah? This is the fundamental model. Maitreya Bandhu, in our book, he's saying that actually it's particularly important for the early stages of the Dharma life, and by early stages he means the first 10 to 13 years, 10 to 15 years maybe. So that's quite a lot, isn't it? For the first 10 to 15 years, this model is probably the foundational model. It can be a deeply unfashionable model now. Certainly when I look on YouTube at spiritual teachers, there's a lot of people saying effort will get you nowhere, particularly effort towards enlightenment. because effort implies striving towards something that you don't have, and that is part of the delusion that you need to overcome. And what you really need to do is just be, just as you are. Just be. And the trouble with that is that unless you've already done a lot of striving, just be gets you nowhere. Does that make sense? And yet, there might be some value in that, particularly if you're coming from a place of low self-worth, etc., etc. So one never wants to be too prescriptive, but I think this model is essential, taken in the right spirit. Taken in the right spirit. It's kind of essential. Having said that, I've never been particularly drawn to it. I'm more of the cosy comfort. You know, can I not just sort of have my donut and get enlightened as well? Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a myth for that one. What I've done, and this is another way round this, is I'm not very self-motivated and I'm not very self-disciplined. So what I've done is I've tried to take responsibility in the Triratna institutions and structures by working for the Sangha and taking up responsibilities for some of the institutions and for people, etc. And what that's done is give me external reasons to try and go beyond my preferences, to grow. I'm not so much self-motivated, but I'm not so bad at responding to the objective situations if they make demands on me. Yeah. So if I put myself in a position of responsibility, then I try and live up to that responsibility, and that has helped me. So there are different ways of doing this. Yeah. But you have to, I think, you do have to have this thing. There's one more thing I want to talk about actually before I wrap up, which is that a drawback of this myth is that we can forget the transcendence bit, and we can think that this myth is all about me becoming better. But actually Buddhism is saying that at some point you have to see through the delusion that the self is a fixed and separate entity. You have to transcend the notion of me. So if we're just concerned about me becoming better, we're still infinitely far from enlightenment, even if we have become better. This is where all the Alex Honnold stuff breaks down. You have to, in the end, through wisdom practice, see through the delusion of self. You have to die to the delusion of self. You have to die to the notion of me and my life as a real fixed thing. Then there's another type of transcendence. Then there's a possibility of another type of consciousness. If you don't have that transcendent thing, this myth just becomes self-improvement. Does that make sense? Self-improvement. You can go to the gym and become healthier and fitter and stronger. You can, learn foreign languages. You can become a better artist or a better writer, or do all sorts of things to improve your life and who you are. That doesn't get you closer to Buddhahood. So there's something mysterious going on here. You have to remember it's self-transcendence, not just self-development. It involves self-development, but that's not the end point. Yeah? And that's a real important distinction to remember. Alex Honnold, by the way, made it. He didn't die in that climb. That's great. He makes it. Tell you what, though, in the film, he talks about this. He is starting to change. One of the reasons that he's, I think, been able to be so successful as a climber is that he has an extremely narrow focus on what is important in life. Climbing is it. Yeah? It. That's the only thing that matters. And he dedicates 100% of his life to that. But during the course of the film, he falls in love. It's the first time he's really fallen in love. First time that he's let somebody else into his life and his defences start to break down. And guess what happens? He starts to fall more. He starts to have more accidents. He becomes more fallible as a climber. So isn't that interesting? I think if Alex Honnold ever learnt to meditate and do the Metabhavana and become bigger and bigger as a psyche, maybe he wouldn't be able to do what he did in 2017. You have to become bigger, not just narrower, and have a narrow goal. You have to actually become broad and include every aspect of your psyche, including the bits of your psyche that you don't like, the bits that you think are shameful, the bits of you that you don't want to expose on Instagram. Yeah? Those bits have to be included as well. You have to come to terms with the whole of you, and all of you unfold and transform. And interestingly, I think Alex is on the way to doing that. Look, when I looked him up just before this talk, he's now become a dad. And he says that he might move into sports climbing, whatever that is. It's a different thing and that's because he wants to devote more time to being a dad. And the priority is now being a dad. And that's different to just getting to the top of the mountain in that singular kind of way. It might not be as exciting, but it's probably even more demanding in a certain sort of way. So next week I want to talk about the myth that particularly complements this myth, the myth of surrender, of self-surrender, which I think is the answer to the shortcomings of the myth of self-transcendence. All the things that we've said are the back of the self-transcendence myth are compensated for, as it were, by the front of the surrender myth. You need more than self-transcendence in your life if you're going to do this in a broad way. Do you see what I mean? Alex Honnold needs more, and he's got more now. He's got a family. You need more than this path of self-transcendence. Come back next week and find out what that more is. and another film as well. Very good. So do watch the film. Do watch Sunshine as well. They're both horror films. Waiting for the